Welcome. The title of this lecture is The Advance of Islam. Historian Gonzalez makes the point that Christianity was in a good place early in the 7th century. Arian leaders adopted Nicene Orthodoxy. Various Germanic people were uniting and embracing Christianity. The British Isles witnessed amazing evangelism, and the Byzantine Empire benefited from the spiritual influence of Emperor Justinian. But an unexpected force from a forgotten corner of the world rose to challenge Christianity. In the Middle East region, after the decline and collapse of the classical empires, new societies rose to take their place. From its origins in Arabia, the religion of Islam quickly spread and eventually covered a cosmopolitan world ranging from Spain in the west to India in the east. Muhammad was the founder of Islam. Born into a poor family in 570, Muhammad grew up in the Arabian land that was mostly desert and sparsely peopled by nomad tribes. A vast plateau, Arabia is a continuation of the Sahara Desert with some patches of grassy oasis. The word Arab means arid. Pre-Arabia consisted of a primitive kinship structure of families united in clans and tribes. The population was over 80% nomad Bedouins who migrated with their livestock from one pasture land to another. Muhammad had a distinguished ancestry. His father died 2 months before Muhammad's birth, but he left him 5 camels, goats, a house, and a slave who nursed him. He had a delicate constitution. He was nervous, impressionable, given to melancholy pensiveness. There were many Christians in Arabia, and as an adult, Muhammad spent time with them. He admired Christian morality and monotheism. Historian Will Durant writes that Muhammad, probably concerned about the tribal welfare and the polytheistic idolatry of the region, felt, quote, the need of a new religion, perhaps of one that would unify all these factions groups into a virile and healthy nation. A religion that would give them a morality not earthbound to the Bedouin law of violence and revenge, but based upon commandments of divine origin and therefore of indisputable force. End of quote. At the age of 40, Muhammad claimed to have a series of visions that he was Allah's prophet. He saw himself as the seal of the prophets. As the final prophet, only he recognized the complete revelation of Allah. Muhammad was a very strict monotheist, believing that Allah was the one true God. The word Islam means the willing and active recognition of and submission to the command of the one, Allah. Muhammad's revelations about Allah, delivered through the agency of the angel Gabriel, were recorded in the Quran. The Quran literally means recitation. Muhammad's first convert was his wife. Other family members and people in the community followed. One key convert was Amir ibn al-Khattab, a courageous man of great physical strength and social power. With such support, Muhammad's cause was gaining ground. After coming into conflict with leaders in Mecca, Muhammad led his followers in 622 to the north to Medina. This journey was a turning point in Muhammad's career. In Medina, he served as the religious, political, and social leader. In 630, Muhammad and his followers conquered Mecca and destroyed idols. Muhammad's insistence upon fidelity to Allah above all helped to unify and otherwise tribally divided people. The Bedouins, who until then had been divided into tribes fighting one another, could now direct their loyalties to one man and one group. The 5 pillars of Islam form the basic obligations of the faith. One with the acknowledgement of Allah as the only God and Muhammad as his prophet. Prayer to Allah 5 times a day while facing Mecca. This ritual prayer took place at specified times. Fast during the holy month of Ramadan. It was a celebration of when the Quran was given to Muhammad. Also during the Ramadan month, there was to be the abstinence from sexual relations from sunrise to sunset. Another pillar is almsgiving to the poor. Its full meaning includes taxation of the rich. A pilgrimage to Mecca at least once during the lifetime of a Muslim male. In Muslim traditions, the world's divided into the House of Islam and the House of War. Muslim government and law rule in the House of Islam. The House of War represents the world ruled by infidels. From the Prophet, a task bequeathed to Muslims was jihad, interpreted from the Quran to mean both moral striving and armed struggle. In most of recorded Muslim history, jihad was most commonly interpreted to mean armed struggle for the defense or advancement of Muslim power. From this, there is the presumption that the duty of jihad will continue interrupted only by truces until all the world either adopts the Muslim faith or submits to Muslim rule. Historian Perry Rogers writes that Allah spoke of a judgment day when believers would enjoy the pleasures of paradise and non-believers would be cast into an eternal hellfire. In his farewell address, Muhammad declared, quote, "I was ordered to fight all men until they say there is no God but Allah." A clash with Christians was inevitable. Perry Rogers cites one relevant passage on this matter from the Quran, quote, "For the sake of God, fight against those who fight against you, but do not attack them first. God does not love aggressors. Fight against the unbelievers until idolatry no longer exists and the religion of God reigns supreme." Muhammad's plan to unite Arabia and spread Islam beyond its borders were cut short by his death in 632. He allegedly declared on his deathbed, quote, "Let there not be 2 religions in Arabia." In Muslims' eyes, one who leaves the faith and converts to another faith will receive no mercy. The offense is apostasy. If the apostate or renegade is a male, the penalty is death. If the renegade is a female, her penalty is flogging and imprisonment. Following Muhammad's death, political authority passed to Abu Bakr as caliph, caliph referring to the successor and defender of faith. This began a tremendous century of expansion. The conquest of Syria took place in the years 633 to 636. The Byzantine army failed to defeat the Muslims in several key battles, and Damascus became the capital of the Islamic Empire. Despite having an army of about 30,000, the Persians were defeated in 636. Eventually, the victorious Muslims built the city of Baghdad, which became the new capital of the empire. The empire grew to include Armenia, the Indus Valley, which is today's Pakistan, and parts of India. In the Holy Land, Jerusalem fell to the Muslims in 638. Next, with Egypt, defended by the Byzantines, who made serious military blunders. One disadvantage for the Muslim armies was the defensive strength of the city of Alexandria. Its massive walls and towers were a formidable obstacle. In 641, an act of treachery allowed the Muslims to enter an open gate, and what followed was a massacre and the destruction of the city walls. Large shipbuilding and navigable skills, lacking shipbuilding and navigable skills, the Muslims had Coptics and Greeks build and sail Muslim ships that they used to invade Sicily. Despite the military success, political problems concerning the selection of caliphs remained a constant challenge. 3 of the 4 caliphs were assassinated. The struggle between the 4th caliph, Ali, and his rivals resulted in a fundamental split in Islam between Sunni, the traditionalists, and Shia, the party. The majority Sunni felt that leadership could be held by any true believer. Shia began as a sect which believed that the caliphate had to be in the hands of descendants of the assassinated Caliph Ali, who was a cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad. The theological differences were small, but conflict continued. From the year 649 to 670, the civil war between Sunni and Shiites stalled Islamic conquest. After 670, the Muslims advanced to the west along the North African coast. The major cities on the coast had strong garrisons. Thus, the strategy of the Muslims was to take desert routes and establish inland bases for future attacks. In 695, Carthage fell to the Muslims, but the Greeks retook the city. In 1705, the Muslims again reconquered the city, but this time they destroyed much of the city, killing most of its inhabitants. The Muslims gained a foothold in continental Europe when they crossed the Mediterranean Sea to Spain to battle the Visigoths. Spanish leaders, like everyone else, were surprised by the landing. The Muslim invaders numbered near 20,000. King Rodrigo lost his life attempting to defeat the Muslims. The Muslim leader soaked Rodrigo's head in brine and sent it back to the caliph in Damascus. The Muslims and Christians fought each other in Spain for the next 7 years. Only a small region in north remained in the hands of Christians. In the city of Cordoba, the Muslims built a huge mosque where a Christian cathedral once stood. Their crossing the Pyrenees was a serious threat to Western Europe. However, Charles Martel defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732. Many historians point to this victory as a major turning point. In his classic, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon wrote of the importance of Martel. Quote, "A victorious line of march had been prolonged above 1,000 miles from the rock of Gibraltar to the banks of the Loire. The repetition of an equal space would have carried the Saracens to the confines of Poland and the highlands of Scotland. The Rhine is not more impassable than the Nile or the Euphrates, and the Arabian fleet might have sailed without naval combat into the mouth of the Thames. Perhaps the interpretation of the Quran would now be taught in the schools of Oxford, and our pupils might demonstrate to a circumcised people the sanctity and truth of the revelation of Muhammad. From such calamities was Christendom delivered by the genius and fortune of one man." However, the Muslims scored victories in Sicily in the following century. The earliest invasions of Sicily were failures, but in 827, the Muslims began large campaigns. One incentive for expansion northward was to increase the Muslim supply of slaves. In Muslim sources, sorties were remembered for the rich booty and slaves that were for the taking. Italy was politically disunited, and this favored Muslim invaders. One non-Muslim turncoat was Euphemius, that's spelled Euphemius, who pronounced himself ruler at Syracuse. He encouraged Muslims to invade Sicily. The Muslim victories did not come easy. When they landed in 827, Muslim armies faced determined defenders, the arrival of a Byzantine fleet, and disease. 4 years later, the Muslims took over Palermo. In the decades that followed, Muslim victories were scattered and sporadic. Most of Byzantine Sicily was taken piecemeal and not a result of open pitched battles. Syracuse stayed in the hands of Christians only until 878. Muslim occupation of Sicily lasted until the mid-11th century. Muslim expansion was successful for several reasons. The Byzantines did not possess any superior military hardware. They had siege engines that were impressive, but not useful for repelling Muslim attacks. Both Christians and Muslims fought with swords, lances, axes, and bows. Byzantine no longer had well-trained citizen soldiers. Many soldiers were foreigners motivated by pay and not loyalty. Some of the foreigners were Arabs who deserted and joined the Muslims. Both Byzantine and Persian armies were mostly composed of fortress troops that were better for static defense rather than offensive campaigns. They also lacked a sufficient cavalry. Whenever the Muslims lured their enemies into desert battle, the Muslims were able to outmaneuver their opponents. In contrast to Christian and Persian soldiers, the Arab Muslim fighters learned fighting at an early age. Moreover, they often were organized in close-knit, small units of men from the same tribe. It was common for them to fight along their relatives and childhood friends. Muslim invaders had the advantage of land mobility with camels. All soldiers traveled by horse or by camel. It was the equivalent of a mechanized force that outpaced opposing armies on foot. The Muslims targeted weak sections of enemy lines, confident they could escape any counter movements by reinforcements that outnumbered them. Only the Muslims had a high degree of mobility in the desert. In fact, the Muslim field armies tended to be modest in size, rarely larger than 10,000 men. Also, the Muslim armies had excellent leadership. Military promotion was based on merit rather than bloodlines. The assessment of 14th century Muslim historian Ibn Khaldun is interesting. Quote, "It is thus clear that superiority in war is, as a rule, the result of hidden causes, not of external ones. The occurrence of opportunities as a result of hidden causes is what is meant by the word luck. This explains Muhammad's victory with small numbers over the polytheists during his lifetime and the victories of the Muslims during the Muslim conquest after Muhammad's death. Terror in the hearts of their enemies was why there were so many routs during the Muslim conquest, but it was a factor concealed from men's eyes." As the Muslim empire grew, non-Muslims in the conquered lands faced serious difficulties. Despite what Voltaire and other philosophers of the Enlightenment wrote, Muslim tolerance for non-Muslims was virtually non-existent. Jews and Christians could not build any new churches or synagogues, and they could not pray or read scripture out loud. They were even prohibited from reading scripture out loud in their homes. Non-Muslims could not ride horses, nor could they bear arms. They were also severely taxed. Christians carried out a number of tax revolts, but they all failed. Scholar Rodney Stark cites cases of mass executions of non-Muslims. Quote, unfortunately, massacres of Jews and Christians became increasingly common with the passage of time. End of quote. The Muslim invasions changed Christian borders. Christianity virtually disappeared in some regions of North Africa. The Byzantine Empire lost its hold in Africa and the Near East. As Justo Gonzalez writes, Christianity's center was not the Mediterranean region, but further north. More specific, its center was along an axis that ran from north to south, including the British Isles, the Frankish Kingdom, and Italy. For Western Christians, Constantinople became marginalized. More so than any other religion, Christianity was a threat to Islam. Unlike the case in other religions, both Christians and Muslims believe they alone have the truth. Each believes it is their duty to bring their message to the rest of the world. Middle East scholar Bernard Lewis explains that Christendom and Islam are two religiously defined civilizations that were brought into conflict, not by their differences, but by their resemblances. They both seek to win the world. Built in 692, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem on the site of the ancient Jewish temple has the following inscription: praise be to God who begets no son and has no partner. The main message is that Islam is the true and correct path. Islam burst upon the world scene in a stunning manner. The triumph of Islam had a profound impact on Christianity. Muslim invasions conquered great swaths of Christian lands never to be regained. For Muslims, the link between religious truth and political power was very close. Religious truth sanctified political power, and political power sustained religious truth. Historically, Muslims almost always referred to their opponents not in territorial and national terms, but simply as infidels. Both Christianity and Islam seek to win the world, thus conflict is inevitable. Thank you.